I'm Mike Kelly from Project Healing Waters Omaha, and tonight I'll cover some simple flies that should be very effective in some of the trout waters we have in the Midwest. So tonight the first two are basically midge imitations. And I was back in like December of 22. On BT's Fly Tying Friday, I did a big presentation on midges. PowerPoint slides and everything explain their life cycle and a bunch of details about them. So if you want to geek out on it, you can look for that. I can send you a link if you're interested. Charlie Craven also recently did a YouTube video that covers midges. So I'll just kind of summarize both of those quickly and not really go, into a whole lot of detail. We'll get to tying the flies. Here's Bill. So this will be the first one that we're going to do. This is actually a size 20, but we'll probably tie it in a size 16 or 14 or 16 just to make it kind of easier to do for the camera. Midges, give you some details here. Midges are commonly fished everywhere in the winter, pretty much year round in the Midwest. And the reason is in the winter when the water is cold, the air is cold, but mostly that the water is cold. You don't have the hatches of other insects that you normally do but midges do tend to, if it's a nice sunny day, it can kind of kick off a midge hatch. But they do live underwater for most of the year, so they're an important food source in lakes or wherever there's slower, deeper water. Their life cycle is larva, pupa, adult. Larva being a vulnerable stage, but a lot more so with the pupa stage. Most larvae are a 1/4 inch to an inch in length, and they're red to olive in color depending on the water conditions, oxygen, clarity, probably mineral content. For most of the midge patterns, just think slim and sparse. Charlie says that most midge flies have too much shit on them. That's pretty much the truth. I mean, you see a lot of midge patterns and they're really big and fat and bulky, and that really doesn't represent the actual insect. They can be very small. Actually, a lot of midges are, size 30, 28, 26, 24. But Charlie Craven kind of made a good point that I was surprised to actually hear like a fly shop owner guide, kind of person make a comment like this, but he estimated that fishermen have like a less than a 20% success landing fish on hooks that are size 20 or less. And the reason is it just the gape of the hook, really, you don't get that much purchase, in the bite that it takes into the fish's mouth. And a lot of times they'll slip out, or another problem with, size 24, 26, real small hooks like that is you have to use such a small tippet that you really have to know what you're doing. You have to have a lot of experience to be able to not break that tippet when you're bringing a decent. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. We've talked about this before. Would you, if you're using such a small, like the 20, would you leave the little spur on there or take it off like you do with the rest of them? Would that help or would that hinder?
Obviously it would help, but actually, there's a whole lot of facets to this because small hooks are very difficult to get out of a fish's mouth, especially if they're in there a little ways. So if you have the barb on a very small hook, um, and you're digging way down in his mouth to try to get it out of there, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get it out. So if you're releasing the fish, um, that's my bottom line is if I'm planning to keep the fish, I'll leave the barbs showing. You know, I don't want them to get off. If I'm planning on releasing them, if I can, if I'm say I'm fishing for golden trout in a secluded mountain lake or you know, cutthroat in Colorado or something where uh, I definitely want to make sure I take care of those fish. I'm probably going to bend the barbs down because I want to make sure that I'd rather have a less successful landing the fish than cause too much damage and keep them out of the water for too long to get that hook out and then you know, have it damage the fish. Um, but one thing to think about though is uh, I think I started getting the tippet size. Um, for the real small hooks, you need to use a very light tippet, and of course, that's going to make it easier to break. Um, but a different way to kind of look at it is maybe to use 18 and 20 most of the time if you can get away with it. Um, imagine like a size 22 midge, but it's emerging from its pupal shuck that basically makes that that fly um, two sizes, you know, two sizes bigger. It makes it double the size of that um, insect because the shuck is hanging off the back of it. So you can get by with a bigger emerger pattern to represent the smaller ones. And then also when we're talking dries, that's when um, the the adult insect is smaller, I believe, in midges than the actual pupa. There's a lot more there, and once they break out and emerge, I believe they're a lot smaller of an insect. Um, that's normally when you're not fishing individual flies, because if you made a dry midge fly and cast it out there, there's no way you'd be able to see it, at least not me with my eyes. So that's when we use flies like the Griffiths gnat and stuff like that that are intended to be midge clusters. So again, you're using a bunch of insects clustered together to represent that
Hey, Mike, I have
tiny.
another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when you're doing a small midge like that, and like you said, you know, you're up at a river or something, will the size of the fly that you make when it's that species, when it's one of the midges and you're in that, will that determine the size of the trout that you're going to get?
No, actually, when the only insects that are hatching, like say in the wintertime, um, in the say you know, real late fall, very early spring or wintertime as you get further south, um, big fish eat those tiny midges. So um, that's the problem with having a very small hook. If you're down to a size, I don't have any real super small ones. Um, there's a guy, Cecil, forget his last name, down in Springfield, I believe, um, Missouri. Um, he ties very, very small flies. And his goal is to catch a size 30, a 30-inch trout on a size 30 um, hook. Inside this little vial is a Mickey fin that he tied on a size, I believe that's a 28 or a 30. If you can see the orange and red, he ties very, very small flies. And but you know, if you want to try to do that and you have to use very, very small line, and then you have to have the experience to be able to fight that fish. Probably a quality drag on your reel and everything to make sure that you're not, and with the angle of your rod and everything, you have to make sure you're not putting too much pressure on that fish as he turns or jumps or whatever to be able to break it off. So I think it's better for the fish if you may not catch as many if they're very selective. If you're using a size 20, a size 18, and little bit bigger tippet, that way you can get the fish in a reasonable amount of time. You're not playing them until they're completely dead. And you're more likely to bring the fish in and get the hook out of his mouth and then release it than if you're using super light tippet and you barely hook the side of his mouth and then he ends up either breaking it off or coming off. So
I have a
just
question.
yeah, go ahead.
What happens to the hook and the fly if you break a fish off? How do they get rid of the hook?
I've always heard that eventually they'll rust off, or just they'll kind of build some scar tissue and it'll end up pushing itself out. Sometimes you'll catch a fish and it has a fly in the corner of its mouth that's broken off from somebody else. I guess I don't personally know. But I have always heard that they can eventually shake them off or work them back out. If they're real small, eventually probably they'll kind of just get pushed out by scar tissue or something. But again, that's why you either want to use barbless hooks if you make sure you want to release the fish. If you're sure you want to release the fish, use barbless hooks. Then it's easier to get the hook out and easier to release them. If you are in a put and take kind of situation like we have around here, you don't have to worry about, if you want to keep, say, a couple of rainbows, bring them home and eat them, keep the barbs there. And that way they don't get off, especially when you get them into the net. A lot of times your fly will come loose because they're flopping around so much and there's slack in your tippet and everything, and they end up coming loose. But so emergers and adults are usually like a black, brown, olive about 90% of the time. They're darker, kind of duller colors as adults. But a lot of emergers incorporate brighter colors like red and white as attractants, and we're going to use a lot of that. I think a good example would be like say a bright fly, red, pink, white, chartreuse, real bright colors on it, may attract some fish. They may come up and either swipe at it or come up to it and turn away. I think a great presentation a lot of times, a two fly rig isn't always, like dry dropper. You can have a couple of nymphs, and what I would do is a flashy bright color nymph or pupa, and then hang another one off of it that's a darker, duller color. So example, say have where it's legal. I mean, that's the key is some places two flies aren't legal. But if it is legal, have one with like white, orange, pink, or red, and then trail it with a black, blue, olive, or brown dropper fly.
Mike, could you say what wasn't legal again?
In some places, you can only use one hook or a single barbless hook or whatever. They have all different rules depending on where you're fishing. I think if I remember right, I believe Idaho was probably one of the most intense regulations that I read as far as fly fishing, where You could be going up a creek, and when you get to a certain bridge, anything past that bridge is single barbless hook. You know, you can't keep any fish or whatever, and all these different rules based on where you are on a particular stream. So, like, you know, like always, you have to make sure where you're fishing, you understand the regulations. But in most places, I believe 2 flies are legal, except for special situations where maybe it's some native brookies or, you know, certain fish that are native fish that they want to make sure they don't get them all fished out of there or whatever. They might restrict the usage.
Some places you can even use 3, like most of Wyoming.
Right. In England, they use 5, 6, 7. Sometimes they call it a
Yeah.
cast of flies, and you know they have them all lined up with different purposes, and they're usually different flies. They're not the same fly. But in the example I gave, I think, you know, you might have a fish come up, and a lot of people have seen where they have a like a bright attractor fly. A fish will come up, look at it, and swim away. If that attracts them up there as they're swimming away, they see one that's kind of more of a natural color, they might go after that instead. So anyway, I guess we'll go to the
Mike,
any other questions before I go to the fly?
I say something, Mike? Mike?
Yeah.
Mike? Hello? You hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. When you're fishing light tippet, it's always good to use a softer rod. If you
right.
use a rod, when you set it, it'll snap every time.
Yeah, with a you know, that's why they have 3-weight, 4-weight, you know, rods, 2-weight. If you're say fishing a spring creek, you know, where the water's super clear, they're not bothered very often. They might be real spooky, and they really want to see, you know, they might get line shy. They don't want to see your tippet or anything like that. You want to use small flies a lot of times. That's when you want to use a 2 or a 3-weight rod. If you're using like a 6 or an 8-weight, you know, you can use those for small flies. But like he said, you definitely want to use a light, soft rod, or at least a soft action to help you with that. You also have to have better control of the angle you're holding the rod. Also, you know, if you do have them on the reel, say it's a bigger fish, and you put them on the reel, you have to make sure you have a nice smooth reel and that drag, and that the drag's set properly. So it takes a little bit of experience and you know, equipment and stuff to make sure you can fish those tiny flies. But I guess my point was, for most of us that are, you know, mostly fish a 5-weight, a 4-weight, and you know, honestly, those small hooks with small eyes, it's hard for me to get the tippet in there. I don't like working with super fine tippet. I don't like working with very tiny flies. 20 is about the smallest I'll fish, and that's pretty rare. That's for trout, and that's if I think they'll be picky.
And you gotta watch out tying a 7X tippet in the wind.
What's that?
You gotta watch when you're tying a knot in 7X tippet. The wind blows that all over the place.
Yep.
Almost impossible. At least for me.
Now, a big advantage too, though, is if you're fishing below an indicator, the lighter that tippet is, the deeper that fly is going to be able to sink. If you make a cast, even if you're not using an indicator, if you make you're nymph fishing and you make a cast, say, you know, upstream a little ways, the bigger the diameter of the tippet or your leader, the more resistance that has to sinking. So with a very light tippet and a longer tippet, your fly is going to sink a lot quicker because it doesn't have as much resistance against the water as a thicker tippet. You know, you always, other than the fish being able to see it, why not always use a, you know, a tippet that'll have a 4 or 5 pound break strength. You just can't get it to, as you throw a nymph out there, or a streamer, you just can't get it to go down deep enough, quick enough, if it's a bigger diameter tippet or leader. Any other questions before I do the fly? I'll go back to this guy. So this is called Willie's Pip. And it's kind of hard to pin down the origin. But I did find something saying it originated on the White River in Arkansas. They do have a lot of midges down there. But it's very similar to a Palomino midge, which is a fly from Montana. It's basically doesn't have that twisted tail. It uses a very fine micro chenille as that extended body. And then it has a like an Antron shellback, like a wing case and a little tuft of white sticking out over the eye. If you looked at that handout that I sent, that picture in there has this fly with that Antron wing case. But the original Willie's Pip was just, you know, like you see here. For the materials, it's basically 4-strand, at least the original was 4-strand rayon floss. There's a lot of other flosses out there nowadays. If you're using, I would say size 18, 20, you'd probably want to go down to 2 or 3 strands of the 4. When you start getting too much, then that extended body is going to be a little bit too thick. But it's basically that rayon floss that's furled on itself. And then the front part is peacock. And then I'm just going to use this because I'm working with smaller flies anyway. I'm just going to use this Vivus white thread. That way I can use it for all 3 of these flies. And so I'll go back to the fly. And this is a size 20. Here's another. I'll put them right here. This is an example using purple. Again, that's a size 20. And here's one I think is kind of cool. That's like a chartreuse floss. This is actually a size 16. It's to make it a little bit bigger for the camera. And easier for me to tie with a camera in between me and the fly. Because I'm using Vivus, I'm going to use this wax, zoom out some, to wax that thread. It's very fine and very slippery. So that just helps me start my thread a lot easier. And I'm not going to go back very far.
Mike, you
Yes.
use the wax on the thread predominantly on the smaller needles or smaller hooks?
So I haven't used this actually until very recently. I just got some. But there's a lot of advantages to using this. One, of course, with the Vivus Nano Silk, You've got the Semperfli. I'm sorry, that's the Nano Silk is the Semperfli. These flies, if you've ever tried to use them, they're very small diameter, very strong. So you're not going to break your thread. I don't even think Jesse could break this thread. And the biggest advantage though is sometimes when you're getting toward the front of the hook, you're getting toward the eye of the hook, you're not really adding a lot of bulk as you make wraps. So you can really torque down on it. It doesn't add a lot of bulk, and it's really fine diameter and strong. But as you're wrapping on slick materials, you can rub this wax on your thread, and then it just kind of coats the thread a little bit and makes it sticky. So as you're putting a material on that might be a little bit slippery, it'll really hold that down. Another thing is, if I'm using this wax and then because of something I'm doing, I'm bouncing my bobbin around like that. Move it down a little bit. You know, spinning it around, bouncing it around. If I had a slick thread and I was doing that, it would be backing up, it would be loosening the thread. If you look at that little clump of wax that I have there, I don't know if you can see that. Let me zoom in some. This is a good example. You can see where that little clump of wax is. If I relax my thread, it's staying put because that thread is sticky and it's staying basically stuck to the hook. So it's not like loosening up and backing up on itself. So you can use that with any thread. I particularly like to use it with this really, you know, thin threads like that. And this Vivus is another example of that. So I have 3 strands of that rayon floss. And I'm going to cut the ends just to make them all even. And just right up here, a couple eyes back from the eye of the hook, I'm going to come over that and then pull on it to shrink it up so I don't have to cut it. And just make a couple of tight wraps with that right on top of the hook. And then I'll come back forward. Now I'm going to turn the hook towards me. And then I'm going to take that floss and just stretch it out. And then I'm just going to twist it. Twist it up pretty tight. And then I'll come back here close to the bend and let that furl on itself like that. I'll do it again, zoomed in some. So I have it twisted real tight. I'm just going to grab a little ways back, and I like to put it on the far away side of the hook from me so I can grab it with my finger and hold it in place and then let it furl on itself like that. And then I'll move to my other finger so I can grab my thread.
I was really trying to figure out what it was. From a distance, it looked like you were putting a plastic covered wire on there because of how smooth it was.
Right. That's just that floss is, you know, that rayon floss is real shiny, like silky kind of. And so as you twist that up, it becomes, you know, real narrow. So now I've wrapped that down with a few wraps. I'm just going to take this and kind of like we do with dubbing a lot of times, just kind of come over and cover up my thread work there a little bit with red. And then tie that off at the front. And you can see with this thin thread, I'm not building any bulk there at all. So I'll come back and get that stuff out of the way. take a peacock herl. Here's a good one here.
Hey, does the wax thread, does that help with buoyancy, or does it, or whenever you put the sink stuff on there, does it affect it at all?
Now, this particular wax, I don't think it's going to really, I mean, of course the thread itself is nylon, so you're not really going to get water soaking into it, I don't think. So I don't think that matters as far as like sinking or floating. But it's mainly just to give grip to the thread is the best way to look at it. So I'm going to tie this peacock herl in so that the long fibers are standing out. And I'm going to come back about at least 2 eye widths back. And then I'll take that peacock herl. Take several wraps here at the front. Sweep it back. And then I'll whip finish. Now with this stuff, you can do 6 or 7. You don't have to worry about it because it's so strong, it'll pull right through. Pull that nice and tight. It's easiest to cut this stuff if you just push against it with a V in your scissors. And then you can just break that against the hook. And there's the Willys Pip. Very easy to tie. Once you get the hang of it and you have your materials set out, you can crank out a bunch of these pretty quickly. And it's a dynamite midge larva imitation. And again, you know, purple, black, olive, pretty much any color you can get your floss in, and that would work.
Where do you get the floss?
This stuff that I'm using is Danville's. I believe this spool right here I just bought at Cabela's.
Okay.
So they have it in pretty much any fly shop if you're buying stuff online. Any of the online fly shops, you can buy this stuff.
Okay.
There's also Flexi Floss. There's all kinds of different floss that you can use. You can use some of it in a bobbin, and it's very convenient. On the smaller flies, actually, I don't think you could use like a thicker thread necessarily, because unless you do like a few thicknesses of it together or whatever. But if you're going to do that, it'd be best to use something a little bit thicker. This one, it has 4 strands. I'll pull off a small piece here. If I can. I cut it too short. I won't be able to get it out of there. But basically, you get 4 strands when you pull it off of this spool. See, I cut it too short and I can't reach in there and get it. But you end up with 4 strands, and you can easily take those strands apart and put them on there. The next fly is the Okie Dokie. And this too is supposed to be kind of a Midwest origin. It's a pretty unique fly in its materials and in how it looks. That's, I believe, an 18. And this is an example of what I was saying is maybe this would be a good attractor. And then depending on how you want to do there's a couple different ways to do a 2-fly rig. You could either tie onto the bend of that hook with a clinch knot with a, say, 8, 10, 12 inches of tippet, and then tie on a fly that's more of a dull color. But that one's in pink. Here's a size 20 chartreuse. And
That
there's a
almost
pink.
looks like a Colorado miracle nymph, Mike.
There's probably, when you get down in a lot of these Perdigon and a lot of those things, they usually have a bead. But there are thousands and thousands of
Yeah.
imitations of, basically this is the pupal stage of that nymph as it's changing over from more of a worm-like larva. It starts to build up a little bit of bulk and get gases inside its skin. So it can kind of appear as lighter colored. I'm not sure why the white works. Again, maybe the white and fluorescent colors is more of a attractor kind of thing to get the fish's attention. Maybe they can see it in stained water. And then if you have another fly that's a more natural color on the back, they might take either one, actually.
I know white works very, very well down at Bennett Spring, and I've been told by some folks down there, the reason is because a lot of people clean their fish down there and you get a lot of white color of the fish remains, and that's what they eat. So that makes a white nymph a very popular fly and a very effective fly.
I have heard that. And here's an example of what that floss looks like in strands. I had purple in case I was going to use that this is just 2 of the strands. So on a size 20, I used 2. This is in
Mike, I
purple, and
see
it's
your
just that
fingers.
rayon floss split apart in 2 strands.
Mike, I see your finger, but could you put it by something so that I can get like a size reference?
Um,
Or is
let's
that just like
see.
dental floss size?
Here's a piece of peacock herl,
Okay.
if you want to kind of compare that. It's real shiny, real silky stuff. But you'll see it'll be Danville's. You can easily find this, but there are other types of floss. 4-strand rayon floss. It says each strand is 300 denier. I don't know. That's kind of a weight, so it doesn't really tell me much, but. So I'm going to start my thread on the hook. And this is a pretty unique material.
Hey, Jesse, you can consider each strand to be kind of like thin dental floss, right? The 4-strand stuff. So that's just a size reference. But like I said, you buy it in a spool, and as Mike said, you strip off parts of it. I got some spools. I'm done. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine, Bill. You're exactly right. That's a good example is, say, take 4 strands of dental floss and put them together. That would be what that 4-strand floss would look like. So I guess you're right. Looking at it, that would be about what dental floss would be. So I'm going to go to the materials here.
Mike, I just put a link to Jay Stockard fly tying on the 4-strand floss that you can buy.
Okay, at least you can get a better look at it that way. And if you want to buy it somewhere else, that's fine too. Thanks, John. So one of the materials in this fly is actually plumber's Teflon tape. Also, you hear it called PTFE tape. I don't know what that stands for. There's different colors for like gas, water, oxygen.
Polytetrafluoroethylene.
What's that?
Polytetrafluoroethylene.
There you go. There's different colors for like gas, water, oxygen, different uses. But basically all you need is just the basic white stuff And this is like $1.50 at any store, Walmart, anything.
Hey, Mike,
Basically, yeah,
there's one other thing that might work, because remember I made that fly with that stretched packaging from Amazon, because it's almost
right,
white. That may work if you don't have
absolutely,
PTFE.
right. And when you see what I do with this, you could use anything. And I'm going to get to a point here that if you don't have this, instead of going out and buying it, you could use white thread. You'll see that. But basically, if you just put a little nick in it like that, it'll normally tear along the, along the line of it, and you'll usually get pretty consistent strips. On the smaller flies, I might say strip this one more time. I already have one set aside here that's already been cut. And it's been split one more time basically. And you can see that one's a little bit tapered, but that doesn't really matter. As you're wrapping it on there, it can get kind of bulky and fold over and become clumsy. So on the smaller flies, it's a little easier if you strip that stuff. Gold or silver wire, I think silver probably looks better. But I had the gold out, so that's what I'm using. And then for the hot spot, the front of it, you can use anything you have that's like fluorescent bright. The orange one I actually did with this thread, just regular Danville's. This was 140 denier Fly Master thread. But I had a couple of these spools of this real shiny floss, so I figured I'd use those for and then just a hook. So I'm going to go back to the fly. Whoops. And tie in that plumber's tape and come down around the bend of the hook a little ways. Right about there. Then I'll take that gold wire.
Hey, Mike, don't stop. But why didn't you wax this?
I did before I put it on.
Oh, okay.
The reason I'm using the wax was to give me enough grip to get it onto the hook to start it, because otherwise it's a real bear because it keeps slipping off. And so I'm going to turn this hook now a little bit so that the thread's not so likely to slip off the eye there as I'm swinging things around here. So now I just take that Teflon tape and you can overlap it enough to build a little bit of a kind of like a grub shape, I guess is a good way to think of it. Like maybe overlap quite a bit here in the center. If your piece is long enough, you can go back again. Come back forward. If you stretch it, it does kind of get a little bit less diameter, but it seems to have a little better control. So I'll just come forward to say one more wrap, and then I'll tie that off. A couple good wraps there. Then I can actually wrap over it a little bit there. Now I'll just take that wire. You can reverse wrap if you want. I think since this was a little bit more thickness, I don't think there'll be a problem holding this down if it does ever get nicked. Make some nice segments there. And then wrap over that wire, several wraps, and then you should be able to break it off like that. Now I'm going to take my thread back here to the point where I want to make, you know, my little that colored front part there. And I think I'll do this kind of chartreuse stuff. I'm going to cut that so it's a little bit cleaner on the end. Tie it down to about right there. And then just take this and basically color up that front. Like that. Whip finish. Oops. And then I'll just cut these both at the same time. And then you'll want to, you can use UV if you want. You can also just use regular head cement just to kind of protect that thread mainly, or floss or whatever you're using. You could use that same rayon floss, use a strand or two, depending on how big of a fly you could do these bigger. Definitely be something I'm sure a bluegill would eat. It's high contrast and you know, so it would show up good in different colors of water.
Now I have a question.
Go ahead.
Usually, I mean, and I know why you did this, but usually you just, all the ones that I've seen so far, you've put the sealant on just the front part.
Yeah.
So what's different with this?
So in this case, you could just put it on the thread. What I'm protecting is not so much normally you're protecting the head of the fly, which is exposed thread. And everything else on the fly normally is covered up. And so it's not exposed and you don't need to have the glue on it. In this particular case, I have that floss from here to here. So I definitely wanted to cover that. And so just to kind of further protect this as a fish's tooth kind of nicks it or whatever, if that stuff wants to come undone, it has a little bit of glue to kind of hold it in place. And then sometimes an easy way to grab small flies, you can just kind of stick your needle in the end of it. And then the last fly is a little bit bigger.
Mike, did you use head cement on the whole body or did you use UV?
I used head cement, just Sally Hansen.
Okay.
On some of these, I did use UV. Some of these other ones. I just did the head cement just to show that there are no rules. You don't have an illegal fly if you didn't use UV resin. This ugly thing is very popular in the driftless region. Very well known for that area. I think a lot of major fly Orvis, places like that, I think they all carry this fly. It's called the pink squirrel. it was originated in Wisconsin by John Bethke. And it's supposed to represent scuds or just like a generic nymph. And there's a whole lot of scuds that inhabit the Spring Creeks in the Driftless region, but there's a lot of scuds in the Black Hills, and there's a lot of scuds in, you know, Bennett Springs, White River, down in that area. I'm sure there's plenty of scuds in Fort Robinson State Park area, Verdigris in some of the areas. Well, it mainly you're going to have scuds. They're going to be common in fertile lakes or streams that have a lot of vegetation, like Verdigris. Again, Bennett Springs, Black Hills. Not so much in clear rocky streams, though. So if you're up in the mountains and you have like a lot of stones in the bottom of the stream, it's probably not so likely to have scuds in there. But they feed on bottom debris. And so in a rocky stream, they're probably not going to be so likely to have a lot of that kind of stuff. I don't need to be so close on that fly. I'll switch to the materials. And for this one, it calls for hare's ear dubbing. I've done that a few times on here, but I just thought I'd use this sow scud dubbing. For one thing, scud, but also it's got a little bit of pink in it and some different colors. I just thought it looked cool on this fly. But I'm going to do something to make it look a little buggier, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Has a bead wire for the rib, and then the front part, you can either use a pink dubbing if you have bright enough. I tried to do it with some, I have some UV kind of stuff, but it's just not quite pink enough. It was a little bit too light, and it didn't turn out very nice. So this Ultra Chenille is a little bit on the big side for what I would do. I got this at Cabela's or Bass Pro. Ultra Chenille, standard in fluorescent pink. There is a smaller size, but the reason I got this actually was for San Juan worms. So, but it does work for a collar on a bigger one, like we're going to do a, I think I have a 10 here. So I'm going to zoom out and show you a couple things here for the, whoops. For the bead, you've got a small hole and a big hole on these. This is a brass bead, but the tungsten ones, you know, they're all basically kind of made the same. They've got a smaller hole on one end and a big hole on the other end. You want the small hole to be toward the eye of the hook. Now this is real hard to kind of fumble around and hold the hook and spin the bead and everything, but it's a lot easier if you take one of these plunger style hackle pliers that holds the hook nice and steady. So all you got to do now is just spin the bead in your hand until you, so there's the wide hole end, spin it around to the small hole. Then I can just put the bead on that way. I can even stick it on the vise that way and then let go.
Hey, Bill here. I've also, for me, I've sometimes just put the shank of the hook, you know, in the vise, and then just use my finger and just go drop it down and then flip it over.
Yes, that works too.
I've also found that if you use a bodkin through the bead itself, sometimes it's easier to slip the bodkin, the bead on the point with the bodkin.
Oh, that's a good idea. I like that.
You can also, you know, use little magnets. There's all kinds of little different tricks you can do to make it easier. But let's get my thread mounted. And then one material that I didn't get out and show you is pearl crystal flash. And that's kind of sort of a tail. I don't know, not sure if I would call it a tail or not. This stuff's kind of hard to work with when it can get all tangled up and everything. But I have the corner cut off of here. So if I want one strand, I can just take my scissors and pull one strand out and then cut that loose. And now it's all back together and just put it back in the drawer. So I'm going to tie this on and just kind of on the top of the hook, but I'm kind of letting this one go on the far side a little bit. Right to about there. And then I'll cut it with, this isn't the final length, but I'll cut it with about maybe an inch hanging off of there. And then on the way back up, I'll tie another piece on that's a little bit more oriented to this side of the hook. So at least they're kind of starting to be split there a little bit. And again, I'll cut that off so I just don't have that extra stuff hanging there. And then I'll use a copper wire for this. This is brassy size. If you're doing this with smaller hooks, you might use a little bit smaller copper wire. And I'm letting that be on the far side as well, because as I start to wrap that as my rib, I don't want it to foul the tail. So I'm going to go back to about, about where the point is if you let the thread hang down. And I'm going to turn it sideways so that sharp point is out of my way. Now I'm going to go back to the materials camera and do something real quick.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
So I've not worked with metal very much, actually at all. And because my thought is though, even wrapping that copper wire with string, wouldn't that make the copper still want to slide out of there, wouldn't it?
It doesn't, because as you wrap that around, it kind of forms to the shape of as you're bending. You can see I'm bending that. It's going to form to the shape of the hook. So it's not going to be pulling back. And then I wrapped that all the way down the hook shank. So that's not coming out of there. I would break it if I tried to pull on it.
Okay.
And then as you wrap it forward, you just kind of get it caught in there in the front and do a few wraps over it and it'll stay.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever had a ribbing come off of a fly. But I see your point that, the metal is slick and the thread, especially with a thick thread, but slick thread, but it doesn't cause a problem. Now, I want a kind of like a spiky body, but this Sow Scud dubbing here, it's from Wapsi. You could use any dubbing, but what I'm going to do here is take a bunch of it out of there. It's actually maybe too much. I'll just do a little dab there. And when you buy Zonkers, pine squirrel Zonker strips from Cabela's, you get them stuffed in this little baggie. And when you buy it from Orvis, you get a skin with all of these held straight in the package. So this is a lot easier to use for, Zonker type flies or whatever, because it's all laying straight. This stuff is all clumped together, and if you try to tie it on something, it's kinking in different directions, and you can straighten it if you really want to, but it's kind of a pain in the butt. So what I use this Cabela's stuff for, and I have to show you, since I showed you that Orvis thing, I have to show you this. I'm in no way Orvis endorsed. I don't have a problem with them. There's actually some things that I'd rather buy from them than other places, but I just thought that sticker was cool. So with this dubbing, I've got my little bit of dubbing there, and I'm going to take one of these really kinked up Zonker strips, and the stuff at the base of this is real gray, and I don't think I want to add that gray color. So I'm just going to, about halfway up the hair, I'm going to take about 1.5 to 2 inches of this and just cut those more brown spiky guard hairs. Pine squirrel has guard hairs that I'll show you at the vise up close, but those guard hairs are just really barred and really beautiful. So anything that's has fine dark markings, it looks very nature-like. So I'm just taking that dubbing I had with those guard hairs and mixing it up. So now I have that synthetic dubbing with some real nice spiky guard hairs stuck in it. And that's about enough. So I'm just going to take that over here.
Okay,
Back to the
I know
vise.
this sounds silly,
Nope,
but
go
the
ahead.
two mix together well, the fake and the real, the synthetic and the real that you cut off? Or were they both synthetic?
So this stuff that I cut off is it's a strip of pine squirrel. There's the hide, and then that's the fur. And so again, in this bigger package, you can kind of see that's basically a whole pine squirrel skin. And then they went down the back with a tool that Dave Jacobs is making. Basically, razor blades separated a certain width and cut that into strips. And those strips can be used for different purposes in flies. But if you can see those, really zoom in here and maybe you can see real fine dark markings. This stuff is like that Coq de Leon hackle, where it's just really super fine markings in it. And so I figured that'd be a good use for this stuff that's not desirable to use for streamers.
I'm sorry,
And
thanks, Mike.
Add it to my dubbing. Go ahead.
No, I was saying thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. So here's my resulting dubbing. So I'm going to turn the hook away again and just do maybe a loop of about a dubbing noodle of about maybe 2.5 inches. So that there I got too big of a clump. So when I try wrapping it on there, it's just going to spin around. So what I want to take is small amounts at a time. You've seen me do this before. Very small amounts. Then you can even stack it up if you want to make it thicker. If you try going too fast and using too big of a clump, it's just going to spin around and it's not going to adhere. So you can see even with this real thick, slick, very thin thread, I have a nice tight dubbing noodle on there that's not coming undone. So now I'll kind of use that real thin stuff at the end to get back here toward the tail. And then just start wrapping forward. And that turned out just about right. Almost like I planned it that way, but I didn't. One thing you can do, and you can do it at this point, I have a little bit of Velcro on my bodkin. You can kind of, bring some of those spikes out a little bit. But then take the gold wire, and that being on the opposite side, as I come around here, I'm not going to grab the tail. It'll just start right into the body. And that gives segments, gives me a little bit of weight. I can add a few wraps up here at the front, like that. Add a little bit of weight. And then I want to come over that wire a few times. And then holding my thread tightly, I should be able to helicopter that off, they call it. I'll come back over that and then get a piece of that chenille. I already have a piece out. Usually on chenille, I'll pick away and at the fluff to get the core. This stuff, you can't really do that. So I'm going to just tie it in by the very tip, real tight. And then this pretty much just takes one turn. And then you can tie that off. Doesn't hurt if you leave a little bit of it like that. And then you can whip finish right behind the bead. Another thing you can do with some super glue, I'm not going to use super glue, but I'll show you the point. If you like using super glue, you can put a little bit of head cement or glue on the bead and then wrap through the glue. And as you wrap through the glue, you're basically wiping it off that bead and down inside the hole. Because if you try putting glue down in there, you're just going to glue up all of your chenille. But this way you can pull that glue down inside there.
Hey, my quick question. Do you ever put glue on your line when you're whip finishing to secure it that way?
To do that, I don't know if I have any with a brush right now. Yes, I do. Hopefully it's not too thick. And I'll show you that as well. What I did with this, it is kind of thick. Comes with a pretty fat brush, so I took about 2/3 of that brush and just cut the bristles off. So it's a lot smaller of a brush there. So to put it on your thread, you would just wipe it on your thread like that. And then you just have to make sure you don't get your whip finish tool in it too much there. You'll be getting glue on your whip finisher. A lot of people do that. I've done about 3 or 4 whip finishes on that fly, but there's that. And then for the tail, you can just kind of take these and kind of fork them out a little bit like that. And then just cut them short about a gap, a hook gap, about like that. And that's the pink squirrel. Any other questions on that?